everyone. This is criminal profiler Pat Brown. And today I want to talk about the case of Mariah Lucio. She just got a stay of execution in Texas. They're going to look at whether she received the death penalty properly in her case, whether they should review the case. I'm not going to get into all the legal aspects. What I do want to get into is I watched this particular documentary, The State of Texas versus, I found it interesting, Melissa, not Mariah Lucio. So right away, I just want to point out, when they take away the last name, they want you to feel sympathy and, some kind of like she's your friend. Melissa. Can you imagine if they had this documentary about Ted Bundy and just called it The State of, whoever was, Florida? Was that where he got tried? State of Florida versus Ted, probably not something they would have done. But in this case, they're trying to evoke sympathy. Now, before I go further, I want to say, I think the death penalty in this case was incorrect. I thought the police interrogation that I saw, although it was just a portion of it, was not one of the better ones I have seen, and it was concerning as far as the results of it, where she confessed and said, okay, all right, I guess I did it. All right, I want to say that up front, but now I want to bring out some hard truths about this case and about Mariah Lucio and her guilt in the matter. While I do not think the death penalty was appropriate, and I'll explain that later, I think she's exactly where she should be. And all this massive sympathy being expressed, oh, she's so wonderful, she's so sweet, she's this wonderful mother, she should be freed, how terrible she spent all this time in prison, oh, how horrible, how horrible. And the Innocence Project, of course, is all over this for all the wrong reasons. So that really bothers me. I'm often bothered by the Innocence Project, but I do agree this one time, a few other times, that this may not be the proper penalty in this case. But that doesn't mean you have to say this woman is, Mother Mary or something. So let me talk about what I think happened in this case and why I'm concerned about people understanding the reality of it, what I think the facts show. And before I go on, please, if you haven't liked this channel before, please do subscribe, like this video, and hey, I now have super thanks. That's the little $ below, and you can even support the channel one time. Okay, that's that. Now, to a very, very sad case. So what happened exactly? Let me explain who Mariah Lucio is from my usual Wikipedia source. She's the first woman of Hispanic descent to be sentenced to death in Texas. She was convicted of capital murder after the death of her 2-year-old daughter, Mariah, who was found to have scattered bruising in various stages of healing, as well as injuries to her head and contusions of the kidneys, lungs, and spinal cord. Prosecutors said that Mariah's injuries were the result of physical abuse, while Lucio's attorneys say that Mariah's death was caused by a fall down the stairs 2 days before her death. Okay. And let me show you just a couple of pictures here to go with this. This is a picture of her supposedly with Mariah, and I'll explain why this is an interesting point in a minute. And this is, again, supposedly Mariah on her last birthday, 2 years old. And this is the stairs that the defense attorneys claim that Mariah fell down, and I will get into that. Okay, so Lucio was questioned by law enforcement for several hours after Mariah's death, quite a long time in the nighttime. She said more than 100 times that she had not abused Mariah, and I don't know if that's true or not, because I only saw this tiny portion that they put in this documentary. I don't know what all went on before they put these little pieces in that say where she said she did it. Until making a vague statement that she was responsible for what had happened to Mariah. Also, it's interesting, it is pointed out that a police officer heard her phoning her sister and saying, don't blame my husband, Roberto, I guess is his name. Don't blame him, he didn't do anything, I did. Later on, it was claimed she never said that by the sister. So anyway, Lucio's attorneys say that she was vulnerable to making false confession because she has a history of physical and sexual abuse in growing up and also during her marriages. All right. So now let me explain what I see as the biggest problem in this case. All right. Melissa Lucio did indeed have not the best childhood, and probably neither did the men she married, who were abusive supposedly toward her. She made poor choices in her life, no question about it, and maybe the husbands made poor choices too. She was married to more than one. She ended up having 14 children overall. During all that time, she wasn't doing very well financially. The household was never a stable place. She was a drug addict. And drug addict over many years, so things weren't improving. In that household, the children were highly unsupervised. And sometimes the teenagers just taking care of the younger ones while she was doing drugs. Now, mind you, some people will say, well, there's nothing wrong with teenagers taking care of their younger kids. That's what you do in a big family. Yes, you do. I have a friend who had 11 children. Wonderful woman, nice husband, 11 great kids, by the way, all homeschooled. They were running around like crazy. They were energetic. There was no neglect. There was no abuse. And yes, all the children helped each other. From the big ones always helped the slightly littler ones. That's normal. But it wasn't because the mother and father weren't present. It was because that's what a good family does. But in this case, in Melissa's case, no, that was not what was happening. What was happening is the children were taking care of themselves, or the community was trying to take care of them. They were being fed sometimes by the community, like giving, when they gave out free food in the community, the children would be there. Sometimes they were homeless. I mean, this was a messed up childhood for all of this woman's children, all of them. Social services was heavily involved in her life. The defense attorneys actually used that as a claim to support how, she was not guilty of what they're accusing her of, because they said in over 1,000 pages of social worker reports, there was never any accusation of abuse, only neglect. Well, first of all, you shouldn't have 1,000 pages on your family because that means you're not a good mother. And even her own lawyer said she's not a good mother. There's no question. She was a terrible mother. And 1,000 pages of neglect. Well, let me tell you something. I have a real problem with the difference between abuse and neglect, because in many ways, neglect is exactly that same thing. It's abuse. Yes, nobody's punching you in the face. That's not what's happening. But you're being neglected, so you can injure yourself. You can be kidnapped. You can starve. You can be abused by other people. Oh, so allowing your children to be abused isn't abuse? Yeah. So a lot of her children apparently were violent little critters themselves because they were growing up without good parental attention. So this was not a good place. Now, let's go to this interesting part about Mariah, because everybody's talking about, here she is, this is the mother of this little girl. Okay, you know how long she was the mother of this little girl? 2 months. Because at 2 months old, that child and I think it was 8 other of her children were, maybe that. 3 of them, I think, went to the first father, and the other ones were just taken away from both Melissa and her husband, the father of those children. They were all taken away into foster care. So she only had that child for 2 months, and then the child was removed. Now, this is the part that really sickens me, and I have no sympathy when it comes down to this, because I think this is horrific abuse of children. Okay, so the kids, they were gone for 2 years. 2 years. They were in foster care for 2 years. Let's take a look at this little girl when she came back. After 2 years, we're talking about years and years and years of neglect in that household, where the social workers were all over them. And now, after 2 years of the children being in foster care, they let the children go home. So the older children they take away from foster care, of course, and this little child, she has spent 2 years with hopefully one family. She does not know her as her mother. She does not know those other kids as her brothers and sisters. She knows another family as her family. And at 2 years old, she's snatched away from that family. And I couldn't find anything out about that family, whether they were heartbroken or thought, oh my God, you're taking my child away. I don't know. But to that little girl, she's being removed from the family she knows and tossed into a household with a drug user and a whole bunch of kids who are not the best behaved, shall we say, and a father that she doesn't know either. This poor little girl. That's what she came home to in November. Okay. All right. So in November, she's there. She apparently gets a birthday cake, which is really nice. Meanwhile, 3 months later, she ends up dead. Dead. Now, according to when they found her, she was still breathing, but barely. And she died, and they're at the hospital, and the doctors there are like, oh my God, this is the worst case of child abuse I've ever seen. Now, they've seen child abuse. And so when her attorneys say, oh, it was just a fall down these stairs, I don't buy it, because I've seen those pictures too. I had a hard time seeing them, but in this show, they have them pasted on a wall. I think a private investigator standing in front of them, and they're a little bit distant. I took a picture of what I saw on the screen, and then I enlarged it and said, oh my God, this is not any fall down the stairs. Don't give me this garbage. And they had some expert on here who actually had the gall to say this, and I'm going to say expert, that because she had fallen down these stairs 2 days prior, and she was acting a little weird, but, nobody was really paying attention, and she was having some issues, but nobody, took her to the doctor. And so when she got close to death, her brain shut down, and the bruising appeared all over her body, because that's what happens when your brain shuts down. All right. You want to believe that one. I'll tell you why. Okay, let's say she really did fall down the steps. And before I go on, who said so? Okay, first of all, she said, the child fell down the steps, which is a very common claim for parents who've assaulted their children, because, you think, well, if the kid fell down the steps, of course the kid would have bruising and other things, so let's just say the kid fell. And sometimes they'll tell their children, tell them she fell. Don't say anything else. Just say she fell. And a lot of times children will go along with the program. So there have been some claims by the children that she did fall down the stairs. My question is this, and this is not answered in this thing, and I can't find the answer anyplace. Okay, when you say she fell down these horrible stairs, she's 2 years old, so she's trying to climb down from the top. Okay, she loses her balance. Where did she lose her balance? Where did she fall? Did she fall from the third step, and therefore it wasn't any big deal? Because many of us have had our kids topple down a few steps, and you don't end up dead 2 days later. Or did she fall from the top of the stairs and do a tumble? That would be worse. But no one is saying exactly how she fell. So I find that interesting. If she fell from the top, you should be saying how she fell, and that she hit the bottom and her head slammed into the bottom. There were bricks there. Her head slammed into the bricks. And you were so concerned because, oh my God, she fell all the way down the stairs and her head hit the bricks. That's not what you hear. You just hear, she fell. Okay, well, an awful lot of 2-year-olds fall down things, and they're perfectly fine. They have a couple bruises, and that's all they got. They don't end up dead. So let's even say that she did fall down the stairs, and she did have bruises on her body, but and she started having those bruises. Those bruises that expert was talking about, where the brain starts shutting down, you get bruises everywhere. Why didn't the parents take her to the emergency room? Oh, because they'd be accused of beating their child? Probably. Because I'm going to say she had enough bruises on her body where they were not going to get near any doctors or any social workers, because guess what's going to happen? Those children that just were returned home 3 months prior, they're all going to go away again. So they're going to all shut up so that they can stay. And so, yeah, they're not going to go to the doctor and show off the bruises. And the kids probably will say she fell even if she didn't. But, okay, let's say she even did fall. All right. Why does she have such horrific abuse to the rest of her body? Let me read this again, what she had. She had, and these, you can see these contusions, and I had a hard time seeing the pictures because they were distant, and I had to pull them in, and I couldn't see clearly all of them, but enough that I can tell you it was horrifying. There are places where she tumbled. If she fell, she would probably more roll, and our little arms would just get in the way, and she'd have some bruises on her arms and legs. She had severe contusions in the side of her body, which was so extreme that I'm going to say that probably didn't come from falling down any steps. And there were contusions elsewhere that were so severe looking that I'm just not buying it. I think she has been abused and beaten. The question comes down to this. So I'm going to say she could have fallen down the steps, but I don't think that's why she died, and I don't think that all those bruises came from the steps. So she was returned to a violent home where she was neglected, where somebody, now, what happened eventually was they started, one of her daughters, Alexandra, started getting the blame. Like Alexandra didn't like little Mariah. She couldn't stand her, and didn't consider her sister because they didn't come from the same father. So she was mean to her, bullied her, pushed her, hit her, and pushed her down the stairs. That's one of the stories. Now, first of all, I want to say in Alexandra's defense, she didn't know this kid. The kid was in the home for 2 weeks when she was a baby, disappeared for 2 years, and came back, and it was this child that just showed up. Now, it's true, they had the same mother, different fathers, but usually kids don't really care that the father's different in that sense, especially with a small child. So I'm going to say she just didn't know this kid. Here comes another kid, another problem, and she's expected to take care of that kid, because that's what happened. The mother made her do all the work because she was too busy doing things that she shouldn't be doing. So she's the one taking care of. Maybe she did push the kid. Maybe she did hit the kid. But that's the whole point. That's called neglect and abuse, by allowing other children in your family, other caretakers, to harm your little 2-year-old. So, still your fault. Still your fault. So, this was a mess all the way around. So, I blame a lot of people. I blame her, number one, because she's the mother of these children, and she did not care for them. And she allowed them to be abused. She neglected them to the point where even if she didn't hurt them herself, and there's still no proof she didn't hurt them herself, because one of her daughters said she did abuse. That's what one of the daughters believes, that she was the abuser and she did hurt Mariah. But I can't tell where the truth lies. So, but she did not care for her children. She did things to lose her children, custody of her children. And when they came back, she still could not care for them. So I'm going to say, if you're a neglectful mother, you're basically guilty of abuse. And you're guilty of what happens to your kids when you do things like that. Now, interesting enough, the father of the kids got a short sentence. And it's interesting, nobody said the father did it at all. I thought that was interesting, because I'm going to say if the father did beat the 2-year-old, they probably would have ratted him out, but not one. She didn't say anything, none of the kids said anything. So I'm going to say the father, even though they said he beat her, not the kids didn't say he beat her. Some defense attorney said that. He may have been abusive toward his wife, but was he abusive toward the child? I don't know, maybe, but nobody said he killed her. So that's interesting. So she was the target here. She's pretty emotionless. The defense attorneys claim it's because she has a PTSD from being abused, and that's normal. And I'm like, yeah, it also means maybe you just don't have a lot of feelings towards your kids. And also, when I saw her in prison, she spends a lot of time talking about herself and her suffering and all this stuff, but she doesn't seem to ever say, I've really any remorse. I've ruined my kids' lives. I allowed my child, I've been a horrible mother. My children have paid the price, and I wish I could make it up to all my children. It's just terrible. I'm worried about my kids. She didn't really go there. She's really more about, I'm having a rough time here. I don't get to see my kids. I don't get to be with my family. One point she writes this poem and she says, being in here is making me, like they're trying to make me feel I'm not smart. Guess what? You're not smart. You're not smart. You made all the worst choices in the world. You're not smart. Sorry. So in essence here, she is very guilty of what happened to her child. But then again, so is the father of that child. Then again, so is the social welfare system that left these kids there for way too long, and so is our social, all the social services that get involved. They let all the kids come back based on what? I would love to know, because it only took a few months for a child to be killed in that home. So there's a lot of people who were involved in Mariah's terrible life and death, and I think all of them I can point fingers at. So in this case, because I think I do think the police interrogation was pretty dreadful and very, very pressured and very leading, and I just thought it was very unfair, and I don't like the way it went. I do. It bothers me what I saw. So I don't know if she was forced into a confession that she really didn't actually kill her daughter. I don't know. However, I think she deserves life in prison. I have no problem with that, because whatever happened in that house, she allowed that 2-year-old to be abused, beaten, neglected, and everything else until she died. So I'm good with life in prison. I think the husband should have gotten a lot more time along with her. So that's where I stand on that. I'm not opposed to the death penalty. If I knew for absolute sure that she was the one who specifically killed her on purpose, a premeditated crime, then I would go for the death penalty. But in this case, there's so many questions about, exactly what happened to Mariah over those 3 months, when she was harmed and how often she was harmed and what the final harm was, that I would just step back and say, life is good with me. I'm good with that. She doesn't need, those children should, that she should be back with those children. I don't think so. And the children don't seem to want to visit her either in prison. So I think she's one of those people that the children need to chalk up as, it's unfortunate that she had whatever issues she had that didn't allow her to be a decent mother to us. Hopefully we can move on with our lives and do something good with them. And she should stay away from them and all grandchildren, in my opinion. So anyway, that's my viewpoint on that. I think the death penalty was probably not a proper sentence here. If they reconsider this and she gets life, I don't have a problem. If they reconsider this and then everybody comes forth to, let's get her out of prison because she's such a wonderful human being, I'm not so thrilled with that, because people watch this film and a lot of stuff Innocence Project puts out, they just paint her almost as a martyr. She's a total victim. She's been a victim all her life, and she couldn't help anything that happened to her, and every choice she made was somebody else's fault. I'm sorry. At some point, having 14 children is your choice, and doing cocaine is your choice. And a lot of times when you were doing cocaine, you were totally neglecting your children and allowing them to be abused or abusing them yourself. Those are your choices. And you had all those years to fix yourself, and you didn't do it. And all your children have suffered for it, and Mariah died for it. So, sorry, out of sympathy. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this. Again, if you haven't been to the channel, please do subscribe and check my playlist for all the other cases I talk about. And like this video and share with anybody you feel like sharing with. Thanks very much for being here. It's always a pleasure to... Oops, I'm trying to find the end of my... This way I get to the end of the show, and then I have to move this thing around and say, oh, how do I end the show? Anyway, I'm ending the show. Bye.